we are really looking at answering those big questions and shaping the future we want to see in a systemic way and by co-creation.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to take part on these design forums. Let me just briefly tell you about what we do at the Danish Design Center. We work to apply design to drive change as a mindset and a methodology and a very practical toolkit that we apply with our partners. So I think we all know that the future isn't predetermined. The future isn't predictable. But I think we know that the outcome of the future can be affected by actions and decisions in the present. We all know that the survivors of these dramatic changes are the businesses and are the organizations who are able to adapt to the changes and to transform their offerings into a new value. We've developed scenario design as an approach to engage with the future. But how do we engage with the future? I think it really calls for new actions. It calls for new ways of planning. We need to act on the future in order to improve our presence. It's not about predicting the future. We know that we can't. It's about creating a more informed foundation for our strategic conversations and decision making. But to act on the future, we need to understand and to engage ourselves. We need to empathize with the future. And this is why we use storytelling, we use foresight, and we use design. And this is what we call scenario design. So when we define scenario design, it's to develop actionable, democratic tools that create an emotional connection to our future's fellow citizens and to make us adaptable enough, not just to react on the future, but to proactively work with the future. We've developed this, what we call the Future Scenarios Kit. It's a design tool for understanding and discussing and shaping the future. So it actually consists of 4 alternative versions of 2050 that we explored through narrated stories from future citizens and an analysis and media files. So it's a kit, it's going to be online, it's going to be accessible for anyone. And we actually built it together with 130 international experts, innovators, designers, and decision makers that took part in a co-creation process at a massive conference in January 2020. It's called the Experimentation by Design. We actually had all these people come together and try to sort of build and co-create and frame how the future might look like. And to do that, we tried to make the future really tangible. We used artifacts, we used storytelling, and we used the building blocks. And we based our knowledge from expert partners and data from several previous projects. All that data from the conference has been collected and analyzed and now constitutes our living future work. And this is what, I'd love to just plunge you into the 2050 scenarios. It's gonna be, I can't do that, but I'll just give you a little bit of a sneak peek into how we worked and how we work with scenarios. So I know there's several people who have worked with scenario design for several years, but I think our approach is we take scenario planning and we add design. We make it more tangible. We make it something that you can emotionally react to. So we actually build the scenarios. It's not just something we hand people on a piece of paper, but we actually have people enter and get immersed into the future. So what we do is we use this 2x2 matrix. It's like a common, pretty traditional setup where we define 2 uncertainties that will sort of frame our possible futures. So these uncertainties, they will then represent an axis with 4 different extremes that we expect to have a major impact on the future. After doing a lot of work together with these partners, we developed these two matrices. The first one is what drives value creation. And on the one side, we have the market. This is something like defined by supply and demand, profit and customer needs, where monetary growth sort of define and drive the market. On the other side will be society, more societally impact-based, value-based decisions that will drive our decision-making and value creation in the future. Looking at a more holistic bottom line, looking at social, looking at planetary needs. These are like 2 directions that we see in our society right now. Which direction will this go? Then the other matrix, the other uncertainty, is how are we organized? So will it be centralized, where we sort of integrated, gathered, and consolidated in our society, where organizations come together to make, top-down decisions to drive control? Or will we, in fact, differently see it will be distributed, where we will organize ourselves more freely in agile, flexible networks, where people will work with targeted efforts, initiatives for many small organizations, Based on that, we built 4 different worlds, 4 different scenarios that we have citizens, decision makers, policy makers, businesses interact with. We call them alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. You can see them in front of me here. These are like radically 4 different futures. You can find a really top-down centralized society. We see some extreme bottom-up solutions. It's supposed to be different. It's supposed to be radically different because it's easier for us to engaged with when we enter these scenarios. And I think it's also really important to say that these are not our takes on what the future is going to be like, but these are ways of interacting with possible futures. So the real future is probably a little bit of everything, a little bit of top down, a little bit of bottom up. But I think with the COVID crisis lately, what we've experienced in Denmark and in several other countries, I think we've gotten a sense of what we call the beta scenario. It's a very centralized, top-down decision-making. So we experience the future through different personas. For instance, Dominic, who's 70 years old, who works in production. So we're actually we experience the future through these different citizens' eyes, and that's how people can relate to it. We work with scenarios in 2050, and sometimes people get a bit critical to say, why you're dealing with such an extreme future? Why not relate to the near future that we can relate to? We find that we can actually have people come together and talk more freely about that future because there's not so much politically at stake. You're not personally at stake. Looking at 2050, if you as an organization or company were working here and acting here, how would you relate? What would you really need to do in order to affect the future? And looking at the different 4 scenarios, do you see something that you just have to do? How does that translate into what we would have to do in 2050? And what would that actually mean for today, for tomorrow? So we have to go back. We have to make that backcasting in order to relate to the future now. We see that everything is changing so fast. So it's not about spending so much time in predicting the future, but actually creating some new conversations about the future and also helping organizations deal with how they as organizations or companies will respond to different changes in society. Scenario design is really strong. It's also a really strong material because it's democratic. You don't have to have a high degree. You just need to experience this world and really to relate to it and say, what would you do if you were standing here? How would that affect your decision making now? So combined with design, with the whole broad design thinking toolbox, this has actually become a pretty tangible and step-by-step way to relate to something that is incredibly abstract and overwhelming this VUCA world.
Hi, a very good afternoon to everyone, and I'm also very excited today to be speaking from Singapore. So my name is Debbie. I'm a principal designer in ThinkPlace. ThinkPlace, we are a leading strategic design consultancy in 5 different countries around the world, and the title of my presentation is really about tackling bigger problems through co-design. So I'll be sharing a little bit about how does that look like with some pictures and sharing about food, of course. Our government is really interested in having people from all walks of life, citizens, private organizations, to collaborate with the government to think about how we can actually create the future together. Across the government, they've come up with an initiative called SG Together. So I wanted to share this backdrop as a beginning to how can co-design effort actually contribute to this. But this is really about the country giving the license for people to say, if I want to have a greater voice to participate in public policy, there's actually a medium to do that. And in fact, by giving that license, a lot of these initiatives are where people are very excited to join, of which right now ThinkPlace is also working with some of the public agencies to actually go about doing that. And at the core of what we do here, we call it a co-design initiative with a co-design methodology. So essentially, what is really co-design is represented by 4 critical voices. While we design for whoever is at the experience of this big system that we might all be operating in, what is really important is also having a balanced voice and having the critical voices represented in the system to come together and say, I have this problem that we see today. I also want to participate in that, and we would like to come together to create a collective future by contributing my expertise, my ideas, and my thoughts to that. One of the things that has been made obvious during COVID-19 is when borders are shut down, people are thinking, where would I buy my vegetables? Where would I buy the ingredients I need to cook a meal when I'm actually having to work from home? In fact, we did this event of which we did it in last year, just before COVID-19, interestingly, and definitely relevant today, where we say, what if we bring together a group of people? So they could be technologists, they could be students, they could be food startups. They definitely can be farmers, producers, suppliers, logistics partners, people essentially in the value chain to come together. Essentially, we wanted to anchor the food security problem on nasi lemak as a way to start the conversation. So having that shared intent is really critical in the success of the co-design effort, of which we dive also into the user's perspective. So whose perspective are we thinking about? Is it the housewife that loves nasi lemak, or the storeholders in Singapore that is selling nasi lemak? Where are they going to find their produce if borders are shut? We also took a system view. The system view was really interesting because people often hold their individual perspective. But when we had the system view and we facilitated that conversation, people, even though they were not an expert in logistics or an expert in food, when they start to connect the dots, they start to see, hey, there are some critical points that if you can see them together, perhaps there are a few critical ones that could really shift the needle in how we approach the problem. If you imagine the system as many nodes connected together, there are a few nodes that are maybe more important than others. So there was really a critical conversation here, which I described as acupuncture points, of which you address them. But what was really fun was people coming together, like I said, different backgrounds, cross-pollinating ideas, sometimes unexpected ideas that individually they couldn't come up with. Overall, because of the entire process of getting people to come together to own the problem, see the problem, and identify opportunity, they then feel like, I want to implement the problem, which is often something that in Singapore, our government would like our people to do more ground-up initiatives. Therefore, what co-design is also transformation design, enabling people, even though they might not be design trained, to say that, hey, we now have a co-design process and we feel enabled and empowered to actually come together and collaborate.
Hi, everyone. And today I'm going to share a topic about transformative service design action, exploring the quality life of the dementia patients and the caregivers. Dementia is right now one of the biggest the medical issue in this society, and then you can see that every 3 seconds we're gonna have one more patient. Based on the research, the dementia has the highest carrying cost because the dementia patients always can move. Sometimes you can bring a lot of intangible cost to the family or the supporting environment. Based on many years research, we didn't just see the needs from the dementia patients. We also find out maybe we should put more effort or focus on the caregivers. Some of the patients, they don't want to go to the hospital, but they really love to talk with their family members or caregivers. But on the other side, the family members and the caregivers, they don't have a very good tool for them to have a conversation or interaction with the patient. We don't have to go to the hospital. Maybe we can have a cupcake, put the cupcake together. Many elderly people, they will love to do that, only to have a very good experience with the caregivers. Even the food is a very good interface to them to have a new relationship with the caregivers. Every step, we collaborate with different PT or with the doctors, even with the psychologists or the caregivers. Right now, we keep delivering this new toolkit to the family who have dimensional patients, we train them and then enable them to recreate the new topics with our design guideline or principle. So right now we have a very good, strong relationship and alliances with the first line caregivers. We even go to the zoo. How about we can do the animal therapy, and then we do a lot of co-design, the participatory design in the zoo, and then to see interaction into the animal therapist who the dementia patient needs. We kind of use the journey to create a scenario to bring the different stakeholders together to see how about to co-seeing, co-learning, and co-creating. It's a very crucial design to bring everyone together to the first line, especially the different customer or different stakeholders, their perspective. And then we use so many different design ways to see or foreseeing the future scenario together. So we can keep to do the design prototyping and then to see if you're thinking how do we adjust the different design details together. The final slide of mine is to say the co-design is kind of when you see the movie Avengers, and then you have to see why the different heroes they have to work together as a team. The challenge is you have to see how to invite the different crucial stakeholders in the beginning of the design process. Not just after your design and you just want to sit. We have to bring them in the beginning of the design process. That is my sharing. Thank you.
First, we started out actually exploring the future of healthcare in 2015. And after doing a lot of research, getting a lot of data from partners, understanding, the most important current trends, what we did, we actually built 4 physical scenarios. They were like 4 major physical cylinders that people could step into. And so looking at all these different 4 scenarios, so visiting them, is there something that's common from all these scenarios? Is there something that's unavoidable? Do you see that something you constantly, even though the scenarios in the future looks different, that you keep returning to? These are the elements that we actually take back and work in depth with. So we start saying, okay, so if this was a future, we know that you'd have to change your value proposition more towards X and X. So how do we work with that? Just getting out there, getting a bit wacky, getting a bit experimental, and then rolling that back to that current state you're in, and how do you relate to that?
I think one of the things when we were unpacking where are the ingredients from farm to food, essentially, when you look at the entire supply chain and you break it down by the ingredients that go into a very simple dish, you start to realize that, hey, what might seem to be just about land issues in Singapore is not just about land issues. There's important involved there, and then retailers coming in to sell the product, and eventually, someone might buy it. Someone at the end of that food cycle say, hey, but a lot of people are also wasting food. They're not finishing the entire plate of nasi lemak, which we also did not realize right at the beginning when we just think purely from, let's say, a food security problem. So I think all of these things would not have emerged if we did not unpack a system problem, looking at various perspectives as people, as participants from all walks of life come together to have that collective discussion. We start with the voice of the intent, which is really the sponsorship, who's sponsoring, let's say, this problem. And it's important to get his or her agreement, or maybe there's a group of stakeholders sponsoring that together, to even first agree what is really the intent of this, where's the scope of where we actually want to dive maybe two layers up and 3 layers downwards. There might be dominant voices in terms of the voice of the expertise. So how do you also manage and balance them so that they feel that they've been heard and their expertise has been well utilized. So similarly, we might approach it in a way that we provide them with an opportunity to share, and then also give them that sense that we also want to open up, that it's really about having that common mindset of what makes a successful co-design effort. Which include things like empathetic to one another, open to hearing one another's view, and ability to have a safety net for ideas.
Maybe you have to have the motivation factors for them, because you have to see, okay, if you want to have the new solutions, maybe you just lack of different resources or capabilities, and the other stakeholders, they just have that. So sometimes you have to see, okay, the goal, the main goal is we have to create a shared the goal or the vision in the future, or the value in the future. And the other one is the capabilities and the opportunity.